Now, according to Fallout, war never changes.
War never changes.
But video games themselves certainly do. Games have changed drastically since the early 90s, and they've changed in good ways and bad. We're focusing on the bad here today, because we're running down 35 years of some of the worst games ever. We're going back many years to the early 90s and looking at every individual year, and one game from that year that was essentially perceived as one of the worst games by culture. So let's get started off with 1990. Double Dragon 3, The Rosetta Stone. There's a reason arcades aren't on every street corner, man. Games like Double Dragon 3 here just kind of ruin the fun for everyone. Of course, everybody knows this franchise. It's the game about little dudes walking right and punching bad dudes. It's one of the early games in the beat-em-up genre, and Double Dragon 3 took out all the fun with one terrible feature. This game has one of the earliest versions of pay-to-win mechanics and microtransactions in the gaming industry. Now, arcade machines were made to eat your tokens. They're called coin munchers for a reason, but the world rightfully just hated how Double Dragon 3 poisoned the well. Arcade games typically give you more lives the more quarters you dropped into the machine, but Double Dragon 3 goes even further. Going to in-game shops, instead of earning gold earned in-game, players had to add more quarters to buy extra guys, more power, or tricks. It's one of the most diabolical arcade games for that alone. And the rest of the game is just pretty bad too, nowhere near as good as the previous games. It has a weird, realistic art style that has none of the charm of the originals, and it was developed by a totally different team, making it just kind of feel flat out wrong. Next, 1991, arcades were still big business then, but we're not talking about the infamous arcade cabinet version of Dragon's Lair here. The arcade version is a series of animated adventures with a comically inept knight running through pretty binary choices, with one choice almost always leading to a ridiculous death. It was an arcade staple due to the absolutely beautiful animation provided by Don Bluth's studio. The Nintendo Entertainment System version has none of these positive points. Now, the NES still clung to life in 1991, even after the release of the Super Nintendo that same year. The NES version of Dragon's Lair is just especially ugly, with giant chunky pixel art characters that sluggishly move across static screens. Every little object on the screen is a death trap. The first screen alone is a nightmare to navigate. A bat spawns, a dragon pops out of the bridge, and the floor falls right from under you. But you also move so slow, and the controls are so unresponsive. Trying to duck under a single bat is not easy. This is the worst type of video game. The only way to win was to unlock basically psychic powers and read the minds of the sick, twisted developers that made this slow, sluggish, technically inept game the way it was. We'll stick to the original arcade version. At least dying in that game was fun. Now, over at 1992, the NES continued to limp along despite Super Nintendo's release a year earlier, like we mentioned. One of the most infamously bad games of the generation dropped in 1992. There was no way we weren't going to talk about Action 52. This compilation cartridge includes 52 original games from a developer called Farsight Technologies. You don't need to play 52 games here to see that something went very wrong during development. The last game on this list is the featured presentation, an aborted franchise starter called The Cheetah Men. It's a platformer that looks wrong in every way, with terrible sprite work and janky, busted controls. Most of the games are boring space shooters with black screens. You don't need to draw anything if you're in space. Now, to add insult to injury though, the Action 52 cartridge cost $199 in 1992 money. We think game prices are ridiculous now, but with Nintendo trying to push games up to $80 US, that's painful, but can we all agree that $200 for a pile of trash games is robbery here? This thing was inspired by Taiwanese counterfeit games, actually. The creator wanted to make a legal version of the same idea, except this game somehow feels like an even bigger scam. Action 52 is one of the worst games ever, but it did inspire something amazing. UFO 50 is this indie game with 50 genuinely great minigames in a single collection that was released not too long ago. Just go play that instead. Next, at 1993, Plumbers Don't Wear Ties is the worst of a very bad trend in early 90s gaming. CD technology was getting better and better, and video game developers learned that they could slap footage onto a disc. A video game didn't have to be a bunch of 16-bit pixels anymore. You could play a movie on a CD. Well, I mean, not quite. Not in 1993. Video footage still had to be ridiculously compressed to just fit onto an old CD-ROM, but that didn't stop people from trying to push FMV games this early. So FMV, if you don't know, stands for full motion video. Yes, there was a time when putting video in a game was mind-blowing, and a whole lot of big publishers and big money guys jumped at the chance to create games with movie footage. These games were universally bad, usually. And the worst of them all was Plumbers Don't Wear Ties, a bizarre game that couldn't even get the full motion part of FMV right. Instead of watching little movies like in infamous games like Night Trap, here you listen to narration while watching still images. You'll get a choice at key moments, and that's about it. The gameplay mostly follows a long, unfunny chase sequence with a topless woman and a man in his underwear. All the actors look like they were picked up from a porno shoot. The main plumber guy wears a tie, so like even the name is a lie. What a weird game, man. Next, in 1994, one of Nintendo's strangest decisions led to the creation of a counterfeit Legend of Zelda game that's somehow an official product. Zelda's Adventure is a weird top-down adventure game that's kind of like mixing Link to the Past with an FMV game. Instead of beautifully drawn forests and dungeons, the screens in Zelda's Adventure are like an ugly mishmash of photoshopped landscapes. Figuring out what to do is a big problem. Everything here is wrong, really. The voice acting is not good. The weapons feel awful. Don't even get us started on dungeons. Oh, and there's barely any music. Instead of the triumphant Legend of Zelda theme, we get the soothing sounds of nature, so it's like a game to fall asleep to. And it exists because Nintendo really wanted a CD-based add-on for the SNES. Instead of producing the technology themselves, Nintendo courted two companies to partner with, Sony or Philips. They ended up skipping Sony, breaking their agreement, which caused Sony to make their own CD-based console, the PS1, of course. We all know how that turns out. Philips never actually produced an SNES CD add-on due to the negative reception of similar Sega products. As part of breaking the deal, Nintendo licensed out the Mario and Legend of Zelda properties to Philips and allowed the company to produce games on the franchises for their own Philips CDI console. There were 3 Legend of Zelda games on Philips CDI. The first 2 have internet-famous cartoon cutscenes, and those cutscenes are extremely funny, but that gives the games some value. Zelda's Adventure here has no value. It's a terrible game on a terrible system that Nintendo just really wants you to forget. They want you to forget this whole mistake. Now, while we're talking about the Philips CDI, let's move on to 1995 and Rise of the Robots. Now, fighting games were huge in the mid-90s thanks to Street Fighter II, Mortal Kombat. These games weren't just fun video games, they were cultural touchstones. They were movies, cartoons, comic books centered around them, everywhere. Fighting games were officially a big deal, and the geniuses at Mirage, the developers, knew how to make them even better with cutting-edge AI and CD technology. Yes, Rise of the Robots is one of the few games to release on the Philips CDI before the console was canceled, and it's easily one of the worst. Reviewers at the time called it the biggest disappointment of the year. It's a fighting game without any of the fundamentals we think of when we play a fighting game. The developers tried to push groundbreaking enemy AI to fight against, but in reality, infinite loops were so easy to pull off. Players can kick opponents to death just in the corner of the screen. It's pathetic. It's a game that gets everything wrong about the genre. It was a cutting-edge piece of technology at the time, but like, that's it. Now we can all look back at this disaster and wonder how this was hyped up to begin with. Now jumping to 1996, the 90s were like the golden age for weird mascot characters, some great and iconic and some pretty mediocre. Bubsy the Bobcat appeared in a couple of bad platformers that nobody really wanted to play, but those forgettable games look masterful compared to the nightmare that is the eventual Bubsy 3D from '96. This is a 3D platformer before developers could copy Mario 64, so instead of fluid, fun controls with a camera that kind of helps you see the action, you're trapped directly behind Bubsy and stuck with really clumsy tank controls, with the camera just sickeningly turning down every time, like wherever you jump. Look, the sucky controls, the camera, aren't the big problem here. It's the design in general. Everything in this game looks like nothing. I know it's technical limitations, but still, you're just this like cartoon bobcat in a low polygon dimension like you're on the grid in original 1982 Tron. It's a mess. His one-liners made for like just really aggravating stuff. They made the game worse because he never shut up, and his one attempt at 3D really killed the series for good.
So, you wanna be a video game star? For starters, grab all the items you see. There's plenty of them in each level. And if you get enough of them, you'll be in for some surprises.
But that's actually a lie. They're trying to revive Bubsy. Yes, believe it or not. Now, next up, the ugliest game of 1997, it's gotta be Redneck Rampage. Build engine games like Duke Nukem 3D, Blood, and Shadow Warrior were all the rage in the 90s, you know? They were the next step after Doom. The environments were starting to look like real places, and those games are still remembered for just fun, fast gameplay. We have an entire genre of indie games thanks to those 90s efforts. The boomer shooter genre keeps the legacy of build engine games alive, but nobody is making homages to this Redneck Rampage. This extremely late to the game ripoff digs deep into redneck culture in a way that really made nobody happy. You'll explore barns, you'll explore rusty shacks, you'll shoot ugly guns and clones of badly rendered people. Everything about this game is just bad vibes. It's got that terminal where do I go sickness. The keys are so tiny, we couldn't figure out where to go in the first level for a long time, and it only gets worse from there.
I'm gonna get you, boy. I'm gonna get you. Hush, puppy.
Compare this to something like Quake 2, which was released the same year. Oh, holy crap, like what happened? Now moving on to 1998, now we're getting to the good stuff, man. Jurassic Park Trespasser, this is a uniquely bad game. Bad games were getting a lot more ambitious in the late 90s. The developers were using technology to do things that we'd never seen before. Physics engines and advanced AI models could replicate reality in ways older games simply couldn't. The developers at DreamWorks Interactive really dreamed big here. Trespasser wouldn't be as bad as it was if the developers weren't so ambitious. This is a game with a physics engine 6 years before Half-Life 2 started experimenting with that stuff. And the computers at the time just couldn't handle it. And they didn't make a very good game around it either. In the game, you play as like a woman that crash lands on an island full of dinosaurs, and the dinosaurs are modeled to realistically move around the environments. But the modeling work and bizarre walk cycles make it all look strange. They bob around weirdly as they move, and then we haven't even talked about the weirdest part of the game yet. So you're essentially a walking, talking arm in Trespasser. You interact with the physics-driven world with like a noodly arm that can pick up guns, but you have to physically control every action of your arm. So like when you pick something up, you can actually roll your wrist. You'll have to do this with every item because the game doesn't aim guns for you. No, you have to physically line up the sights with your eyes in just a really, really weird mechanic. One of the weirdest mechanics in video game history. Why did they make a game like this? Because they had a vision. It didn't really land. Next in 1999, Superman 64, that's what everybody calls it. It's technically called Superman: The New Adventures. If you've never seen it, you're in for an experience. This is an infamous disaster where you don't save cities from supervillains or really leap tall buildings in a single bound. No, it's just kind of about flying through rings and navigating these weird, muddy environments. Instead of letting you do something fun, the first mission in this game was just like immediately hitting you in the face with how confusing and poorly made it is. It's infamous now at this point. You flying very slowly around a foggy metropolis, flying through rings on a time limit. You also have to complete mini objectives like stopping a crime between rings, but these are somehow even more incomprehensibly fast. You can fail a quest without even knowing why or how, and the game doesn't help you understand the controls either. Like, you're given seconds to figure out how you can lift cars and throw them. Nothing here is intuitive. Flying is a mess. It's hard to see. Everything looks bad. It really was a total failure on every level. It was a big seller in 1999 somehow, even if the game was mostly unplayable. I think it was just the power of Superman, the animated series, the comic books at the time. Really, that animated series, it was so good, and it deserved a lot better than this mess. Next, it's the year 2000 with Daikatana. This is the legendary first-person shooter disaster designed by John Romero, one of the developers of the original Doom. Back in the day, making maps for Doom was enough to make you like a rock star. Now, Romero left id Software to create his own video game company called Ion Storm, and then poured, like a lifetime into designing one of the worst FPSs of all time, man. Daikatana is a shooter set in the cyberpunk future, but it's also a fantasy game where your hero travels through time, visiting different time periods with their own unique arsenals and enemies. Each time period has a full selection of guns, and the weapons never overlap. And to be honest, like, it's a creative, ambitious idea. It's too bad most of these weapons are just extremely bad and unfun. Many of the starting weapons actually will harm you, like a launcher with an extreme amount of splash damage, or a shotgun that fires its entire magazine with one trigger pull. But the guns aren't the worst part of the game. The worst part is the AI companions. These things are so dumb, they'll get stuck on level geometry like every few minutes, and you can't exit a level without your AI companion, so you'll have to babysit them. It is an absolute mess. Now jumping to the year 2001, this is a difficult one because it's one I actually have a lot of nostalgia and fondness for. It's Extermination. This is where we're getting to the weird stuff. This isn't strictly the worst game. I mean, this is the era of licensed game garbage and shovelware that we talked about before, so an original game concept can't possibly be the worst, but it's an interesting evolution and one of the earliest games from designer Swery. Somehow, this rough game was published by Sony and is actually technically one of the first survival horror games on the PS2. But Silent Hill 2, this is definitely not. Extermination is about a team of special ops soldiers sent to an Arctic research base to fight an evil infection of alien creatures. It's basically The Thing, except replacing tension with goofy, laughable dialogue and some really, really rough third-person shooting combat. The gameplay is passable enough in the early stages of the game, but it becomes painful by the end. There are a lot of mediocre reviews from major publications for this game, and we're gonna guess that none of them got to the end because the final section in the game, it required absolute precision, almost to like a broken point. It was maddening. Final bosses like this are why video games ditched boss battles for so long in the mid-2000s, because Extermination towards the end was really rough. Still, it's got some cool moments. I'd say definitely watch a YouTube video about it if you've never played it. But anyway, let's move on. Next, the year 2002. Legion, The Legend of Excalibur. This is a title even the most die-hard fans of bad games probably haven't heard of. Look, it's not a notable bomb like Daikatana, and it didn't have involvement from someone in the future that ended up making good games like Swery. Legion, The Legend of Excalibur is a rare find. For a brief time, when RTS games were still riding high with like the blockbuster success of things like StarCraft, developers tried to make real-time strategy work on consoles. Legion is one of those games, and it is a poorly made, shoddy, busted attempt at a strategy game on the biggest console of the time. It just did not work out great. This is a top-down action RPG where you control a small group of heroes. You'll run across these like ugly, muddy maps to complete objectives like, you know, protecting a village or raiding an enemy castle, all with a young King Arthur. Your characters level up as you progress, but there's a big problem with the gameplay. So if you don't level up enough, later challenges just become impossible. Warcraft 3 came out the same year. That really puts things into perspective here. Legion wanted to be Warcraft 3 early, and it just failed miserably. Next, over at 2003, Drake of the 99 Dragons. This is a pillar of bad gaming. It's one of the most iconic, awful games of the generation, and for very good reason. It's just awful to play. Looking at pre-release images of this game, it doesn't look too bad. I was pretty excited for it at the time, seeing it in magazines. The characters were drawn by the artist Bruce Timm, the guy behind Batman the Animated Series, that whole look. It almost looks like a real game if you only check out the cover. The badness really sets in after starting a new game, firing it up. What could have been a cartoon-inspired take on Max Payne shares much more in common with Superman 64. So you're always on a time limit in the game, and you're in these maze-like levels where it's never really clear what to do or where to go, and these aren't traditional levels. They're like arcade challenges where you need to collect random objects or defeat enemies. There's no real design feel to it. There's a big empty area to run around in before time runs out. The design is just bad. It shouldn't be a surprise that controlling Drake just feels just as shoddy with janky controls and awful movement. Look, nothing about this game really works, and it was an instant flop with critics and audiences at the time. Next, we're in 2004. Now, we've talked about it already. You know, new technology can lead to the creation of innovative game mechanics, and everybody tries. Despite everything we're gonna say about the video game Lifeline here, it's definitely an innovative one. Sony didn't just publish Lifeline, the company also developed it. It's a game that takes advantage of voice recognition software. Yes, instead of taking direct control of a character, you order them over a microphone, like you command them. It's a genius idea for a game, but the big problem is that it doesn't work. In Lifeline, you play as a character in a control room, telling a hapless member of a space station how to escape. You have to give her specific instructions. Now, she has no internal life whatsoever. Like, you have to command her to turn, walk forward, shoot enemies that appear. It's a great idea designed in the most absurd way possible. This is a survival horror game where you watch a woman ignore your orders while she just does nothing to even preserve her own life. It can be really frustrating. This was another one I was so excited for with the tech. Maybe that technology worked better in Japan where this initially was, but the North American version really struggled to understand even the most basic commands. It was a fascinating experiment of the time, but that's all we look back at it as anyway. Next, at 2005, Marvel Nemesis, Rise of the Imperfects. Look, it isn't the worst Marvel video game on our list. Somehow there's a much worse one later, but it is the highest profile flop of 2005. This was a complete boondoggle that actually wasted EA's then partnership with Marvel by creating a kind of fighting game brawler nobody really wanted. The announcement in 2004 confused some audiences with an extremely unwieldy name that just smacked of branding. This isn't a game about Spider-Man having fun with the Fantastic Four. This really just felt like an exercise in corporate synergy. EA invented a new string of boring characters here called the Imperfects, and bad game history was born here. Look, you have things like Marvel vs. Capcom pitting superheroes versus video game characters, and that stood the test of time. Marvel Nemesis just invented a gang of jabronis for Wolverine and Venom to beat up. These characters were just really unremarkable, the ugly brown-green smears, and audiences at the time were just sick of all these generic style looking characters. Instead of bright, colorful characters from the Marvel universe, from the pages of comic books, we got the saturation turned way, way down. Marvel tried to hype up the game with a 6-issue comic series about the Imperfects, and surprising no one, that didn't sell. That was just an even bigger mark. It was another miss and something that just served as a huge black eye on the reputation of EA and Marvel. The partnership between these two guys did not last. Now, next up, Sonic the Hedgehog rules the year 2006. It's Sonic 06, man. Our hands are tied. The game is so synonymous with the year it was released. It's most often called Sonic 06 by fans, like I said, and it's probably to distinguish it from the good games in the series. Sonic 06 is just a weird mess. The gameplay is rough, the story is bad, the graphics are bad, the title is generic, like, even the loading times are bad. The loading times are actually legendary in this game, with weird pauses between conversations in the open world town area leading to a loading screen. We get loading screens for like text boxes. And in a game that was so unstable, any loading screen could actually cause a crash. And then the gameplay. The game is one of those ones where it's simultaneously too fast and too slow for its own good. The physics are insane, there's buggy parts to it, like Sonic will just drop through the floor of levels unpredictably. You'll take damage even when you're attacking it. Like, this is just a broken game on a lot of levels. And it took a while for Sonic to kind of come back from this mess. Look, we can make an entire hour-long video about Sonic 06. I still think there's some funny things to talk about it, some charming elements, but it really is something. You gotta see it to believe. Sonic, thankfully, is in a much better position these days. But 2006 was pretty rough for him. Next, at 2007, the hits keep on coming because the next thing here is Vampire Rain. And this game gets something wrong we haven't talked about nearly as much. The 2000s were the rise of the stealth game. You know, the PS2 and Xbox era introduced video games where sneaking was your main priority, right? Games like Splinter Cell and Tenchu made stealth fun. Metal Gear Solid was the king. And stealth only became like a stronger gameplay gimmick with Assassin's Creed as that series went on. Now, Vampire Rain attempted something like a paranormal Splinter Cell, and it failed horribly. This is like the worst case scenario for stealth games. This is a game where enemies will just kind of catch you with no warning, no rules, in which none of the stealth lessons developers learned in games like Metal Gear Solid 2 or anything were even applied. You're dropped into giant featureless city areas and you just basically start sneaking. And one wrong move means death. So from the first minute of this game, you're kind of just confused and probably dead. Not to mention the laughably goofy story elements and things they got going on here. It runs badly, it looks stupid, your guns are worthless, and it's just the perfect blend of bad game soup. Next up, 2008, flashback to Alone in the Dark, the franchise that just keeps coming back. The first game in the series defined the survival horror gameplay aesthetic like way back in 1992, but nobody has ever really had any idea what to do with Alone in the Dark as a franchise since then. So, case in point, this reboot of the game by developer Eden Games. This was an ambitious reimagining of the property. It wouldn't be like a slow, plotting survival horror adventure. No, it would be like a prestige TV series in the form of a video game with action, adventure. Literally, every chapter begins and ends like a TV show with recaps, and players were free to skip ahead. Like, it's a good thing too, because Alone in the Dark is such a buggy mess that certain levels can't be beaten. On our copy, on Xbox 360, during the big car chase sequence, the world doesn't load in fast enough, so our car goes careening off the edge of the world. Yes, this is one of those games. What makes Alone in the Dark special is ambition. It's like a partially open adventure where you can explore some monster-infested areas in Central Park in New York City. The main mechanic here is related to fire and burning things. So you can set things on fire and then transfer that fire strategically to defeat monsters or solve puzzles. It spreads and you manage that. It's kind of impressive to see a door or an entire room burn, while the physics really handle how the objects crumble and fall apart. But it also barely works. Maybe you're starting to see the trend of overly ambitious games released to the public, even if they don't really work, and this is a great example. It's like one of the buggiest big budget games, and definitely the worst one of 2008. Later revisions couldn't really save this franchise either. I mean, this is a game where you combine gasoline with bullets to shoot fire bullets. It's just stupid. Next up, moving on to 2009, the military video game industrial complex was in full swing by this point. 2009 was the year of Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. This was 2 years after Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare really popularized military shooters on console like we're set in present day. So really, the stage was set for more of these types of games. And in swoops Rogue Warrior, this incompetent wannabe that somehow starred Hollywood talent. So the main character, Dick Marcinko, is voiced by a very odd performance of Mickey Rourke. It's based on Dick Marcinko's book. It was apparently based on real-world events in the Cold War. This game wants to be a mature game for big boys, so every other line is laced with absurd profanity. It's actually kind of low-key brilliant. I love it. Like, just look up a YouTube clip of all the dumb voice lines in this movie, all the one-liners. But it just feels like a parody of a military game. This is what the developers at Rebellion thought people wanted, and a lot of us did. Like, it's funny. Today, it's just a creaky reminder of how bleak video games used to be. It's a really bad campaign. It's like probably the worst Call of Duty campaign you've ever played. It's like 2 hours of gameplay. It's rough. The mechanics are not exciting, but at the end of the day, you do get to hear Mickey Rourke say some truly insane things, so I'm always going to give it points for that. All right, new decade with 2010. Now, licensed properties at this point were kind of dying off, and Iron Man 2 might be a big part to blame. The Marvel Cinematic Universe was moving ahead, and video game developers couldn't really keep up with demands. Big, embarrassing bombs based on Marvel movies and even DC movies might have destroyed licensed cash grabs on big consoles, forcing this genre of games onto like mobile and handheld consoles for a while. Games were getting too hard to make and taking too long to produce. They couldn't churn them out for these movies. Case in point, the Iron Man 2 game. Iron Man 2 was a game where you flew around big levels, demolishing enemies with an arsenal of weapons. It seems simple, right? It sounds awesome, but unfortunately it's not. It's ridiculously short, extremely ugly, and really repetitive. That's what killed it. There's nothing here but deserts filled with trucks to destroy using the same couple of weapons. Now, Sega would soon give up attempting to publish video games based on movie licenses. The Xbox 360 era kind of ended the idea of every big budget movie getting a video game, which is so funny because these movies at the time were absolutely crushing it, but the game department just couldn't keep up. For every surprisingly decent Captain America game, or hell, even the Batman Begins game, there's things like the Thor game, or even worse, this Iron Man 2. Next is 2011 with Mind Jack. This is one of those bad games we can't stop thinking about. This is undeniably a trend chaser at the time. Like, we're going to be seeing a lot of this throughout the 2010s, but Japanese game developers tried to connect with Western video game markets in interesting ways. Mind Jack is an early attempt at that, combining third-person cover shooting in the styles of like Gears of War with one very weird gimmick. In this game, you can actually mind jack enemies, civilians, or even robots to solve puzzles and defeat enemies. Despite the story being developed by outside talent in the UK, the script is baffling. It's got grammatical errors, it's got indecipherable background dialogue, it's just a mess. And it's a wild experience that's almost worth tracking down if you're really, really into playing dumb old games. Mind Jack has this fun mechanic that was actually later kind of used in Driver San Francisco to great effect. Now, in Mind Jack, it's simply a way to quickly move around the battlefield. It's also strangely cruel, like you're mind jacking a civilian and then getting them gunned down in the street. It just feels so weirdly mean in a game where you're meant to like connect with the characters. Are these people psychopaths? I don't know. Maybe we're the crazy ones for playing this game from start to finish. Now, 2012 with Silent Hill Downpour. In a lot of ways, Downpour killed the Silent Hill franchise for like 16 years. Downpour is a straight-up classic attempt at survival horror that isn't even remotely scary. You run from a big red light in awful chase sequences or fight enemies with bad controls that don't even feel like Silent Hill enemies, all with a stuttery frame rate. And fighting the enemies feels bad in this game. Shooting guns feels even worse. The story is kind of an attempt at recreating the heartbreaking magic of Silent Hill 2, but is so ham-fisted it botches its own message about forgiveness and revenge. The enemies look like corn rejects, and the spooky levels kind of just feel like fun houses. And worst of all, Downpour includes characters from the, at the time, still ongoing Silent Hill comics, like The Postman. It's a baffling choice to tie in anything from some of the worst comics that we've seen, but that's the grave the developers chose to dig for themselves. And after everything we even said, I wouldn't even say Downpour is the worst game in the series, which still says a lot. Look, Silent Hill fans are all over the place. This game did find an audience, but in 2012, it was considered one of the biggest disappointments. Now jumping over to 2013, of course, Ride to Hell Retribution. This is what happens when you try to copy Grand Theft Auto, but don't have like the talent, the budget, the foresight, I don't know, to actually do it. There's a story behind the development of the game where the scope drastically changed during development, shrinking what was once an anticipated open world crime adventure into this very boring third-person shooter. This is a game with about 3 music tracks, but it feels like it's got 1. You'll be listening to it for like 20 hours, just riding motorcycles and bopping bad guys in the head with weird, kind of motion captured combat. The motorcycle driving sequences are limited to on-rails shooting with no player agency, so you'll mostly be exploring these small maps, shooting ugly bad guys, and then infamously just sleeping with women seconds after rescuing them during random encounters. It's a total joke, man. This game feels like it aimed for the moon and hit the bad game stars. Now, next up, 2014, Yaiba Ninja Gaiden Z. You know, we talked about Mindjack, Silent Hill Downpour with Japanese developers trying to get to that Western audience, that Western game market, but neither of those games are as extraordinarily terrible as this. It is hard to describe what Yaiba even is. It's kind of like a grindhouse reimagining of Ninja Gaiden, a series that didn't need to be reimagined, recreated by arguably one of the worst developers. Spark Unlimited became a go-to bad game studio for Japanese publishers to dump their once well-regarded franchise. So in 2013, Capcom gave them Lost Planet 3. In 2014, Koei Tecmo gave them Ninja Gaiden Z. Look, sometimes we don't like picking on developers, but these games are garbage, man. Yaiba is flat out one of the worst action games we've played. Full stop. The developer Spark Unlimited must have been like one of the greatest hucksters in the universe to convince real companies like Capcom that they should be invested in. Yikes. Now over to 2015, Alone in the Dark. This franchise just wouldn't go away. Now in 2008, that reboot blew our minds with just how bad it was, but single-player horror games were still popular at the time. In 2015, there's a new trend. Multiplayer cooperative shooters, and so many games tried to breach the market that Left 4 Dead created way back in 2008, I believe. So there were plenty of latecomers, but this one, Alone in the Dark Illumination, this added even more weird elements to the mix. The levels were partially randomized, and each character had different abilities. It was meant to be a cooperative, replayable experience, except nobody wanted to play it. We can only assume the rights to Alone in the Dark come cheap because companies kept trying to revive it in ways that just made absolutely no sense. Next, the year 2016, things that made no sense, if we're just going to keep talking about that, it's Resident Evil, the low point with Umbrella Corps in 2016. Resident Evil 6, I guess, blew the budget on massive spectacle and multiple playable cooperative campaigns, but it seems like it kind of cost Capcom huge numbers. The game wasn't nearly the success as the company wanted, so we entered this kind of long, dark age of Resident Evil. Before Resident Evil 7 brought these games back in a big way, the series was kind of on ice, man. It felt dead, and Umbrella Corps made us all wonder, maybe Capcom wanted to kill it. This is a multiplayer spin-off of Resident Evil where you play as a team of mercenaries trying to extract materials from a zombie-infected arena. 2016 is definitely the age of these forgettable, worthless, multiplayer exclusive shooters. The developers of Borderlands produced their own boring shooter called Battleborn in 2016. I mean, everybody wanted in on the multiplayer market, but there's a big issue that still eludes online game publishers today. Your game has to be fun. And unfortunately, Umbrella Corps was not. It was kind of embarrassing. I'll admit, I played it, I think I made a video on it, and I didn't completely hate it as much as most people did. I like just playing as an umbrella soldier blasting dudes, but even that aside, it was a rough time for Resident Evil. Next, at 2017, oh boy, Mass Effect Andromeda. This one was a boondoggle, a failed chance to reset a beloved game series after the divisive ending in Mass Effect 3. Now, we were all rooting for Andromeda to succeed, but it failed spectacularly. The new open world gameplay was pretty boring. The story fails to hook the player, even after hours of exposition. You know, the characters just don't hit as hard. The alien worlds of the Andromeda galaxy feel really pedestrian. Everything here just kind of felt stale.
Bolstering all shields.
It wasn't the worst game ever made or anything. I think some people ended up liking it, but just everything here felt really stale, and a lot of people were disappointed. Look, compared to most of the games on this list, this game is pretty playable. But when we imagine what this game could have been versus what we got, that's why it goes on the list. Next, 2018, how did a major video game publisher like Square Enix release a game like this, The Quiet Man? We'll be asking the same question in a few years. For now, we have to make sense out of one of the most baffling game releases of the last decade. The Quiet Man is a cinematic beat-em-up with FMV cutscenes, telling the story with the audio muted to mirror the deaf Quiet Man main protagonist. It's an interesting gimmick, just kind of executed in the worst way possible. The story, the way it was told, was kind of disjointed, and to understand the story, you have to play the game twice. An interesting experiment, but we did not want to play the game twice because it was not fun. It was awful. It was basically playable, so it's better than a lot of the junk out there, but the story, everything here was a drag. It's such a strange release from a big studio. We almost wish there were more games like The Quiet Man out in the world, just because it's so confounding. It's terrible, but at least it isn't boring. Next, to the year 2019. Something was just going on at Square Enix around this time. This is the mega publisher behind Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest. They made some bad investments, and Left Alive is the type of failure that only a big publisher could really put together. It's a great idea on paper. This is an open world mech shooter where your stranded pilot can move around on foot or hijack giant mechs for these big mega-sized combat scenarios. On the ground, you're incredibly vulnerable to these patrolling giant mechs, but you're also much stealthier. We can imagine an amazing game using this premise. When the first trailers dropped, it seems like it had potential. Left Alive, though, is just not that game. It's a plotting, poorly put together mess of a game. It's an example of how misguided this game was. Despite being set in a sci-fi future, there's free DLC that covers the game with World of Tanks ads. Yes, this might be the weirdest DLC we've ever seen in an already bad game. Square Enix published two of the weirdest, worst games 2 years in a row. Congrats to them, and it's not even the last time they're going to pop up on this list.
This is what I was born to do.
Full status check. Legs are badly damaged and unable to function.
What about the weapons? Tell me I can use those at least.
Shoulder weapons returning in error. Only the right-hand weapon is functional.
Fast forward to 2020, Warcraft 3 Reforged. This is another one that we don't see from big publishers usually, like this much of a misstep. Usually they value their video game releases and reputation, especially their storied classic games, but unfortunately Warcraft 3 Reforged really destroyed the legacy of a fan favorite RTS, kind of just digging up the corpse to bury it all over again. The developers at Activision Blizzard are normally known for their polished products like this, especially from Blizzard, who have really kept up their sterling spotless record. There's a developer that would rather cancel a game than tarnish their brand, usually, but things started to change here. Reforged is a remake that makes the original game uglier, that changes missions haphazardly and like erases the original. When the RTS remake first released, it completely replaced the original version of the game, which pissed people off even more. You were stuck with this half-assed remake, where some of the missions are completely redone while others are barely changed at all. It's a strange thing to see a half-finished game, one that must have had a bigger scope and budget before they ruthlessly cut back. Either way, Warcraft 3 Reforged is the worst way to play an incredible legendary game.
Our town is under siege.
Orders ready for
Research complete.
Yes, my liege.
2021, can you believe it? Square Enix is back here. Balan Wonderworld is another mid-budget mistake from the huge publisher, but this one makes a lot more sense. You've got Yuji Naka, co-creator of the Sonic the Hedgehog series, designing a colorful platformer where everyone is dancing non-stop. Do we even need to say this game is bad? Everyone knows how bad Balan Wonderworld is. It became a meme, you know, from the bizarre cutscenes to the broken gameplay. It feels like a unfinished Kickstarter game. It's also insultingly simple. I know it's for kids, but still, like, everything functions with a single button press. The different outfits you unlock give you powers that often serve no purpose to the gameplay, and instead of boss fights or interesting enemies, you'll replay a boring QTE sequence that just repeats itself over and over again. It's like the definition of madness, this game. Balan Wonderworld instantly became a joke, like, as soon as it released, and the game is more interesting now because it was Yuji Naka's last game before going to jail for insider trading. What a world we've made for ourselves here. Cut to 2022. Oh man, live service games really ramping up and crashing and burning. And here we have Babylon's Fall, this bizarre live service game that somehow failed before it even began. This is a game where the servers were shutting down while copies of the game were still freely available in stores. That it was developed by Platinum Games is another example of big publishers forcing good creators to make games that they don't want to make or they're not familiar with. Platinum is usually an amazing action game developer, but I guess they're not exactly experts at online multiplayer RPGs with drip-fed content. This isn't the only live service disaster from Square Enix. You know, Marvel's Avengers kind of fell flat, but Babylon's Fall is a real big example of a live service game dragging a good developer down. And sadly, we'll probably be seeing a lot more of that in the years ahead. In the year 2023, we had The Day Before, but this isn't a video game, it's a scam marketed as a video game. The 2020s are going to be defined by a lot of this type of stuff. Not even Steam is free of shovelware games and crypto NFT garbage dressed up to look like the next real video game release with a big budget. And The Day Before claimed to be a lot of things: an MMO, an extraction shooter, a combination of The Division, and the storytelling and vibes of The Last of Us. Technically, the trailers were so cool cool for people, it became the most wish-listed game on Steam ever at the time. Whether the game was actually a scam or a case of severe mismanagement, we'll never fully know, but the developers closed soon after the disastrous final launch. The game was accused of asset flipping, lying to news outlets, all kinds of stuff, allegedly. These many red flags got this far, it's crazy. We're guessing it won't be the last time the Steam marketplace has to deal with developers and publishers trying to game the system like this. The day before was actually delisted 4 days after release and then never returned to Steam. Hopefully, lessons were learned to prevent something like this from happening again, but we'll see. Now it's 2024, and the ruinous nature of live service continues, with Warner Brothers games and Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. This is a game that just feels like it was confused from the get-go. It started as a melee-focused game before switching gears and using only ranged weapons. There was clearly a vehicle system implemented at one point, but that's all kind of scrapped. The story is weird and like oddly mean-spirited, featuring both the callous death of Batman and one of Kevin Conroy's final performances as the character, and a heartfelt in-game tribute to the same character that they kind of like wasted. Look, you can't have both with this.
But you always gotta end on your best joke.
Instead of an ending, the game promises a series of alternate realities where you'll fight Brainiac over and over again for live service reasons. But the story was actually quickly wrapped up much earlier than intended, and all future DLC was cancelled. The live service elements add confusion to an already extremely confused game where monetization always trumped fun. It's a modern problem for video game companies where simply selling a game isn't enough. They need to sell you the game over and over again. And with Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, unfortunately, all the Arkham goodwill, the Arkham universe, the Arkham vibes were squandered. Absolute wasted potential. There were some fun movement systems here, some cool art direction, but ultimately it led to a really bad game that people kind of rebelled against.
I'm above these creeps' pay grade.
Can't a bloke get some aliens to cut loose on?
And now, in the current day, 2025, this year isn't over yet, but we can safely bet that Mind's Eye is both the worst and most interestingly bad game of 2025. This game feels like a GTA ripoff, but also like a platform building type thing. Like it's a platform like Roblox, but without any of the creative elements or good tool sets, or really anybody wanting to make anything. It's also an open world game with none of the open world, none of the witty writing, and just a lot of really boring gunplay. Like the best worst games on this list, you're given pointless time limits to drive around town, and the game was hyped up as something it was absolutely not. Mind's Eye is like the biggest, weirdest, dumbest game of 2025. This game was supposed to be a kind of proof of concept demo for the Everywhere game building engine. Mind's Eye has a game creation tool built in that's anything but impressive. You can make some boring shooter levels or driving sequences with this tool and share them to other players. Apparently, the user-generated content can also be shared across other Everywhere engine applications, but all the user content we found is universally terrible. This obviously exists because of the success of like creator tools in Roblox or Fortnite. At least people wanted to play those things. At least people like those tools. Everything in Everywhere is just like a terrible GTA user map. And it all just feels like a company trying to overvalue itself and try and go for those GTA bucks and using name recognition of the developers. And what came out was a rushed, incompetent game. This game actually drove me insane. I remember doing the before you buy for it, and I feel like I went crazy.
Is that gunfire I'm hearing?
Well, it ain't popcorn. They think I blew up Little John's trailer.
Okay, focus on getting out of there alive.
That would be the idea.
Anyway, that's the evolution of the worst video games from 1990 all the way to 2025. We don't know what the future holds, but we can guarantee that there's always going to be amazing games to go along with some really bad ones. So let us know what games you think you deserve a shout out as the worst of the worst. There are definitely going to be other ones for certain years that maybe you hated more. So hit us up in the comments. Thanks for taking this long trip down memory lane with us. If you like this video, clicking the like button helps us out. We really appreciate that. And if you're new, consider subscribing, maybe hitting that notification bell, because we put out videos every single day. But as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.